The ultrasound photo was creased from being folded and unfolded too many times, the edges soft from living in Ren Castellano's pocket for the past 3 weeks. She pulled it out sometimes when no one was watching. In supply closets, empty hallways, the narrow bathroom of her studio apartment. She'd trace the tiny curve of the spine, the suggestion of fingers no bigger than grains of rice, and try to feel something other than terror. 23 years old, pregnant, alone, and one missed shift away from losing the only job that stood between her and the street. The Grand Meridian Hotel rose 40 stories above Fifth Avenue, all marble lobbies and crystal chandeliers and guests who spent more on a single night than Ren made in a month. She'd worked here for 2 years, invisible in her gray uniform, moving through gilded hallways like a ghost. The pay was terrible. The hours were worse. But the tips from wealthy guests occasionally bridged the gap between survival and disaster. Today, disaster was winning. Castellano, Mrs. Fairfax, the head of housekeeping, materialized at her elbow like a disapproving specter. Lydia called in sick. You're covering the penthouse. Wren's stomach dropped. The penthouse? But I've never... First time for everything. The guest is out until 7. I want those rooms spotless before he returns. Mrs. Fairfax thrust a key card into her hand. Don't touch anything that looks expensive. Don't open any drawers. Don't speak to anyone. Understood? Yes, ma'am. And for God's sake, don't embarrass us. This guest is... She paused, something flickering behind her eyes. Fear, maybe. Or awe. Important. Very important. Do your job and stay out of the way. The elevator to the penthouse required a special key. Ren rode up alone, watching the numbers climb, her reflection ghosting in the polished brass doors. She looked tired. She looked scared. She looked like exactly what she was, a girl in over her head, drowning in slow motion. The doors opened onto a different world. The penthouse wasn't a hotel room. It was a kingdom. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city like a throne surveying its domain. The furniture was leather and dark wood, masculine and expensive. Art hung on the walls, real art, the kind with museum placards and insurance policies. And everywhere, in every detail, the unmistakable weight of power. Ren moved through the space on silent feet, her cart of supplies trailing behind her. She cleaned the way she'd been taught, methodical, thorough, invisible. Bathroom first, then bedroom, then living areas. Don't touch anything personal. Don't leave any trace of yourself behind. The bedroom made her pause. A massive bed dominated the space, its sheets probably worth more than her rent. On the nightstand sat a photograph in a silver frame, an elderly woman with kind eyes and silver hair, her smile carrying the particular warmth of someone who had loved deeply and often. His mother, Ren guessed. Or grandmother. Someone important enough to keep close even in a temporary space. She stripped the bed and remade it with fresh linens, hospital corners sharp enough to pass military inspection. She was fluffing the pillows when she felt it. The telltale flutter low in her belly, the baby shifting, making its presence known. Her hand went to her stomach automatically. The ultrasound photo crinkled in her pocket, and she pulled it out without thinking, needing to see it, needing to remember why she was fighting so hard to hold her life together. A door slammed somewhere in the suite. Ren startled so violently she nearly dropped the photo. She shoved it back toward her pocket, but her hands were trembling, clumsy with panic, and the picture slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. Footsteps in the hallway, heavy, purposeful, coming closer. Ren lunged for the photo, but she wasn't fast enough. A hand reached it first. She looked up, and up, into a face that stopped her heart. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back from features that belonged on ancient coins. Sharp jaw, sharper cheekbones, eyes the color of aged whiskey, framed by lashes too dark and too long for a man who radiated danger the way other men radiated cologne. He was also, unmistakably, the stranger from New Year's Eve. Wren's blood turned to ice. She hadn't seen his face clearly that night. The masks, the champagne, the darkness of the service corridor where he'd found her crying after a drunk guest had cornered her. He'd handled the situation with terrifying efficiency, then returned to her with gentle hands and a voice like velvet over steel. "Are you all right?" he'd asked. She hadn't been all right. She'd been shaking, humiliated, seconds away from shattering, and he'd stayed with her, this stranger in a mask, talking her down from the edge with patience she hadn't deserved. At midnight, when the fireworks exploded over the city and everyone else was kissing someone they knew, he'd kissed her. And she'd let him. And one thing had led to another in a coat closet that smelled of cedar and champagne, and by the time the sun rose, she'd slipped away without learning his name. She'd told herself it didn't matter. A moment of weakness. A single night of pretending she was someone who could have beautiful things. Then the pregnancy test had come back positive, and pretending became impossible. Now she knelt on the floor of his penthouse bedroom, frozen, watching him study the ultrasound photo with an expression she couldn't read. "This is dated 3 weeks ago," he said. His voice was exactly as she remembered, low, controlled, devastating. 24 weeks along? Wren couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at him while her entire world crumbled. He looked at the photo for a long moment. Then his eyes lifted to her face, and she watched realization dawn like a sunrise. Slow at first, then all at once. "It's you." The words came out rough, almost disbelieving. "I've been looking for you for 6 months. I don't." He held up a hand, cutting her off. His gaze dropped to her stomach, to the slight swell she'd been hiding beneath oversized uniforms and strategic aprons. New Year's Eve, the service corridor, the coat closet. His jaw tightened. "You left before I woke up. I didn't even know your name." Wren's throat constricted. "I didn't know yours either." "You do now." He stepped closer, and she scrambled backward, her hip colliding painfully with the nightstand. The framed photograph wobbled dangerously. "I'm not going to hurt you." His voice softened, though his eyes remained intense. "I would never hurt you. But I need you to answer one question, and I need you to answer it honestly." Wren nodded, unable to trust her voice. He held up the ultrasound, the tiny profile of their child caught in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Is this baby mine?" The silence stretched between them, infinite and terrible. Wren thought about lying, thought about running, thought about all the ways she could escape this moment and pretend it never happened. But she'd spent 6 months carrying this secret alone, and she was so tired of being afraid. "Yes," she whispered, "the baby is yours." Enzo Marchetti, because that was who he was, she knew it now, had heard the name whispered in terrified tones by staff who cleaned his rooms and served his meals, stared at her with an expression that cracked something open in her chest. Wonder, disbelief. And beneath it all, blazing like a fire finally given oxygen, hope. "Then you're not going anywhere," he said. "Not until we talk." Wren pressed her back against the wall and watched the father of her child advance toward her with the focused intensity of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. She should have been terrified. She should have been screaming. Instead, for the first time in 6 months, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Safe. They talked for 3 hours. Or rather, Enzo talked and Wren listened, her back against the headboard of his impossibly expensive bed, a cup of tea warming her hands that she didn't remember him making. He sat in an armchair across from her, close enough to feel his presence, far enough to give her room to breathe, and dismantled her defenses one question at a time. Where did she live? A studio in Washington Heights, barely big enough for a bed and a hot plate. Did she have family? A mother who'd stopped speaking to her after she dropped out of college? A father who'd left before she was born? How was she planning to raise a child alone? She wasn't planning. She was surviving. One day at a time, one shift at a time, trying not to think about how impossible it all was. That ends now, Enzo said when she finished. His voice carried the weight of a verdict. Excuse me? You're carrying my child, my heir. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes burning with an intensity that made her stomach flip. Did you think I would let you struggle alone in a studio apartment, working yourself to exhaustion, praying you don't get fired before the baby comes? I didn't think anything. I didn't know who you were. Now you do. He rose from the chair in one fluid motion, all coiled grace and barely contained energy. You'll move into my home. You'll have the best doctors, the best care, everything you need. And when the child is born, we'll figure out the rest. I'm not moving in with a stranger. I'm not a stranger. I'm the father of your child. You're a man I spent one night with 6 months ago. Ren set down the tea with trembling hands. I don't know you. I don't know anything about your life. And I'm not some possession you can just collect because I happen to be carrying your baby. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or respect. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those whiskey-colored eyes. You're right, he said finally. I'm asking you to trust me without giving you any reason to. That's not fair. He moved to the window, his silhouette cutting sharp against the fading afternoon light. My mother is dying. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors give her 3 months, maybe 4. Ren's breath caught. I'm sorry. Her last wish, her only wish, is to see me settled, to hold a grandchild before she goes. His voice roughened, cracking at the edges. I've spent 6 months searching for you, hiring investigators, reviewing security footage, chasing every lead. Not because I wanted to claim you or control you, but because that night, he turned to face her, and she saw something raw in his expression. That night was the first time in years I felt like something other than what my family made me. You looked at me like I was just a man, not a name, not a legacy, just a man who happened to be in the right place to help. Ren remembered. The coat closet, the darkness, the way he'd held her afterward like she was something precious. She'd felt it too. That strange, inexplicable connection, like finding a missing piece she hadn't known she'd lost. I can't make you come with me, Enzo continued. I won't force you, but I'm asking. He stopped, and she watched him struggle with a word that clearly didn't come naturally. Please, let me take care of you, both of you. Let my mother meet her grandchild before it's too late. The photograph on the nightstand caught Ren's eye, the elderly woman with the kind smile. His mother, she realized now. The woman who was dying, who wanted nothing more than to hold the baby currently growing inside Ren's belly. She thought about her studio apartment, the mold in the bathroom, the neighbor who played music until 3 a.m., the walk-up stairs that grew harder to climb with each passing week. She thought about the doctor's appointments she'd been skipping because she couldn't afford the copay, the prenatal vitamins she'd been rationing, the terror that woke her at 4 a.m., whispering all the ways she was going to fail this child before it even took its first breath. And she thought about the look in Enzo's eyes, not possession, not control, but something that looked almost like desperation, like hope, like a man clinging to the only good thing he'd found in a sea of darkness. 3 conditions, she heard herself say. He went still. Name them. I want my own room, my own space. I'm not, we're not. She gestured vaguely, heat flooding her cheeks. This isn't that. Agreed. I keep working. Maybe not at the hotel, but something. I won't be a kept woman living off your charity. A muscle twitched in his jaw, but he nodded. We'll find something suitable. And I meet your mother before I decide anything permanent. If she doesn't want me there, if I'm not what she was hoping for, I walk away. No arguments. Enzo crossed the room and stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. He reached out, slow and deliberate, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She's going to love you, he said quietly. She's going to take one look at you and love you, because that's what she does. That's who she is. You don't know that. I know my mother. His hand dropped to his side, but his eyes stayed on her face, soft and fierce and full of something she couldn't name. And I'm beginning to know you, Ren Castellano. You're not what I expected either. What did you expect? Someone easier to find. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips, and much easier to forget. He offered his hand. Ren looked at it for a long moment. This hand that belonged to a man who commanded empires, who had searched for her across an entire city, who was offering her everything she needed and asking for nothing but a chance. She took it, and let him pull her into a world she was nowhere near ready for. Isabella Marchetti was nothing like Ren expected. She'd braced herself for judgment, for cold assessment, for the particular cruelty of wealthy mothers sizing up unsuitable women who'd gotten themselves pregnant by their sons. She'd practiced answers to questions about her background, her education, her obvious inadequacy as a match for a man like Enzo. Instead, the woman who greeted her in the sunlit conservatory of the Marchetti estate took one look at Ren's face, then burst into tears. Oh, my dear girl. Isabella's voice was thin but warm, her Italian accent softened by decades in America. She reached out with hands that trembled slightly, framing Ren's face like something precious. Look at you. Just look at you. He described you perfectly, but I didn't believe. I thought perhaps he'd imagined. Mama. Enzo appeared at Ren's shoulder, his voice carrying a gentle warning. Don't overwhelm her. Hush, I'm dying. I'm allowed to overwhelm whoever I want. Isabella smiled through her tears, and despite the gauntness of her face, the shadows beneath her eyes, she was radiant. You must be exhausted. Sit. Sit. I'll have Maria bring tea. Or would you prefer something cold? What do pregnant women drink these days? In my time it was wine, but they've changed the rules. Ren found herself laughing, a sound she barely recognized, rusty from disuse. Tea is fine. Thank you, Mrs. Marchetti. Isabella. Or Mama, if you can bear it. She squeezed Ren's hands. I always wanted a daughter. God gave me 3 sons instead, all of them stubborn as mules. You'll be a blessing in this house. Mama. And you. Isabella turned to Enzo with a look that somehow managed to be both adoring and exasperated. 6 months. 6 months you searched for this girl, and you never thought to check your own hotel? She wasn't working the penthouse floor, the staff rotations. Excuses. Always excuses. But Isabella was smiling, her hand reaching up to pat her son's cheek. Go away now. Let me talk to her alone. Girl things, pregnancy things, things that will make you uncomfortable. Enzo's gaze found Ren's questioning. She nodded slightly, surprised to find that she wanted this, wanted to know this woman who had raised a man capable of such tenderness, such patience, such relentless hope. He left, and Isabella Marchetti proceeded to dismantle every one of Ren's defenses with the precision of a master surgeon. Over tea and pastries Ren couldn't afford to refuse, Isabella extracted her entire history. The absent father, the distant mother, the scholarship to Columbia she'd lost when her grades slipped after a bad breakup. The years of working double shifts, of scraping by, of learning to expect nothing so she couldn't be disappointed. "You've been alone a long time," Isabella observed, not unkindly. "I'm used to it." Used to it isn't the same as wanting it. Isabella set down her teacup with deliberate care. "My son is not an easy man to love. He carries weight that would crush most people. Responsibilities, expectations, the legacy of generations who built their fortune on things I won't speak of in polite company. But beneath all of that, he has his father's heart. Loyal, fierce, capable of love that burns like a bonfire if you let him. I'm not sure I know how to let anyone in anymore." "Then learn." Isabella's eyes, the same whiskey color as her son's, held Wren's with surprising intensity. "Life is short, my dear. Shorter than any of us want to believe. Don't waste it being afraid of the one thing that makes it worth living." Wren thought about that conversation often in the weeks that followed. She settled into the Marchetti estate like a stone dropping into still water, the ripples of her presence spreading outward in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her room was on the third floor, spacious, private, decorated in soft blues that Enzo admitted he'd chosen specifically because they matched her eyes. Isabella visited her every afternoon, full of stories about Enzo's childhood, his father's courtship, the family history that stretched back centuries to a small village in Sicily. And Enzo himself was everywhere and nowhere, a constant presence at the edges of her awareness. He appeared at breakfast with questions about how she'd slept. He materialized during her afternoon walks through the garden, falling into step beside her like it was the most natural thing in the world. He left books on her nightstand, pregnancy guides, parenting manuals, a worn copy of Italian poetry with certain passages underlined. He never pushed, never demanded, never made her feel like anything other than exactly what she was, a woman carrying his child, finding her footing in an unfamiliar world. But sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart stutter. And sometimes, when their fingers brushed reaching for the same dish at dinner, she felt electricity arc between them like a physical thing. She was falling for him. Slowly, impossibly, against every instinct that told her to protect herself. And then she remembered. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks after she'd moved into the estate. She was sitting in the conservatory with Isabella, helping sort through old photographs for an album Isabella wanted to complete before. One of the photos showed a group of men in suits, gathered around a table at what looked like a formal event. "New Year's Eve," Isabella said, noticing Wren's interest. "5 years ago, I think. One of Enzo's business dinners." Wren studied the faces and her blood turned to ice. She knew that face. The man on the far right, with the silver hair and the cold smile. She'd seen him at the gala. Not at midnight, not during the party, but after. When she'd been making her way back from the coat closet, still flushed and dazed from what had happened with Enzo. She'd passed a door that was slightly ajar. Had heard voices inside. Had paused, without meaning to, and listened. Her memory was like that. Always had been. Photographic, the doctors called it. The ability to recall anything she'd seen or heard with perfect clarity. It had helped her ace exams, memorize orders, remember the preferences of hundreds of hotel guests. Now it pulled that conversation from the vault of her mind with crystalline precision. "The Marchetti heir needs to be eliminated before the old woman dies. Once he inherits, we lose our window. It has to look like an accident. Or better yet, like a rival family. The Contis have been making noise about territory. We frame them, start a war, and take control while they're busy destroying each other." The voice belonged to the silver-haired man in the photograph. "Who is this?" Wren asked, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. "On the right?" Isabella glanced at the photo. Oh, that's Salvatore Ricci, one of Enzo's advisors. Trusted family friend. Known him since he was a boy. She frowned. Why do you ask? Ren's mind raced. Salvatore Ricci. She'd seen him at the estate twice since she'd arrived, once in Enzo's study, once leaving through the back gate late at night. Each time, something had pricked at her memory, some warning she couldn't quite grasp. Now she understood. No reason, she said. Just curious. But her hands were trembling as she set the photograph down, and her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She was living in a house with a man who was planning to murder Enzo, and if Salvatore Ricci discovered she knew, if he realized she'd overheard his plan 6 months ago, he wouldn't just kill Enzo. He'd kill her too, and the baby growing inside her. That night, she went to Enzo's study. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his features at the sight of her in her nightgown, her face pale, her hands clasped over her belly. Ren? What's wrong? She closed the door behind her and locked it. We need to talk, she said, about Salvatore Ricci, and about what I heard the night we met. Enzo's face went very still. Sit down, he said quietly. Tell me everything. So she did. Every word she'd overheard, preserved in the amber of her memory with perfect, terrible clarity. The plan to eliminate him. The timeline tied to his mother's death. The scheme to frame the Contis and start a war that would consume everyone in its path. When she finished, Enzo was silent for a long moment. He stood at his window, his back to her, his shoulders a rigid line beneath his shirt. You're certain, he said finally. The voice you heard, you're certain it was Salvatore. I have an eidetic memory. I remember everything I see and hear, exactly as it happened. Ren's hands twisted in her lap. I'm sorry. I know he's like family to you, but I couldn't stay silent. Not when your life. How long have you known? The question was soft, but it carried an edge that made her stomach clench. I only realized today, when I saw his photograph with your mother. I didn't make the connection before. I never saw his face that night, only heard his voice. But when Isabella said his name, something clicked. She paused. I came to you immediately. I swear, Enzo, I wasn't hiding this. He turned then, and the look on his face made her breath catch. Not anger. She'd expected anger. Instead, she saw something far more devastating. Grief. The particular anguish of a man discovering that someone he loved had been planning his destruction. Salvatore taught me to ride a bicycle, he said, his voice distant. He was at my first communion, my graduation, my wedding. A muscle jumped in his jaw. He held my hand at my father's funeral and promised to help me carry the family forward. I'm so sorry. Don't be. Enzo crossed to his desk and pressed a button on the intercom. Get me Dante. Now. He looked at Ren, and beneath the grief she saw something harder crystallizing, cold, focused, lethal. You did the right thing. You may have just saved my life, and my mother's. His gaze dropped to her belly. And our child's. The next few hours passed in a blur of hushed conversations and men in dark suits moving through the house with quiet urgency. Ren was escorted to her room by 2 guards who positioned themselves outside her door with polite but unmovable firmness. She tried to sleep, failed, paced the length of her room until her feet ached, stood at the window and watched the lights of the estate flicker in the darkness, wondering which of those lights belonged to rooms where Enzo was planning a response to betrayal that had been 20 years in the making. She was still standing there when the door opened. You should be in bed. Enzo's voice was rough with exhaustion. He'd shed his jacket somewhere, rolled his sleeves to his elbows, and there was a shadow of stubble darkening his jaw. I couldn't sleep. Neither could I. He crossed to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Salvatore has been making quiet moves for months, shifting money, cultivating allies, positioning himself. If you hadn't told me, he stopped. He was planning to act within the week, before my mother passed. The doctors think she has days, not months. He must have known. Ren's heart clenched. Days? She's fading faster than anyone expected. His voice cracked on the words. I was going to tell you tomorrow. She wants to see you. Wants to talk about the baby, about names, about all the things she won't be here for. He turned to face her, and she saw the boy beneath the man, the child who was losing his mother. I'm not ready. I thought I was, but I'm not. Ren reached for him without thinking, her hands finding his face, cradling it the way Isabella had cradled hers that first day. You don't have to be ready. You just have to be present. To love her while she's still here. Enzo closed his eyes, leaned into her touch, and for a moment, in the darkness of her room, he was just a man. Grieving, afraid, desperate for comfort. Then the window exploded. Glass shattered inward in a cascade of glittering shards. Ren screamed, throwing her arms up instinctively, and Enzo was already moving, shoving her behind him, pulling a gun from somewhere she hadn't seen, positioning his body between her and whatever threat had just breached their sanctuary. Men poured through the window, black-clad, masked, moving with military precision. The guards outside her door burst in, and suddenly the room was chaos. Gunfire, shouting, the acrid smell of smoke and violence. Ren pressed herself against the wall, her hands wrapped around her belly, her mind reciting prayers she'd thought she'd forgotten. A bullet struck the plaster inches from her head, and she ducked, choking on a sob. Get her out! Enzo roared, firing at shadows. Get her to the safe room! Hands grabbed her, one of Enzo's men, his face familiar from a dozen dinners she'd barely paid attention to. He dragged her toward the door and she went, stumbling, her bare feet slipping on broken glass. They made it to the hallway, almost to the stairs, and then Salvatore Ricci stepped out of the shadows, a gun in his hand and a smile on his face. Hello, little bird, he said pleasantly. I was hoping we'd have a chance to chat. The guard beside her reached for his weapon. Salvatore shot him without looking, the motion as casual as swatting a fly. The man crumpled, and Ren was alone in the hallway with the monster who wanted to burn down everything she'd come to love. You've caused me quite a bit of trouble, Salvatore continued, advancing slowly. 6 months of careful planning, undone because a maid has a freakish memory. He shook his head. I should have killed you that night. I heard you in the corridor, you know. Heard you pause outside the door, but I thought, what could some nobody in a caterer's uniform possibly do to hurt me? Please. Ren's voice shook. The baby? The baby is why you're still breathing. Salvatore grabbed her arm, yanking her against him, pressing the gun to her temple. The Marchetti heir, or should I say, the new Marchetti heir, now that Enzo is about to meet an unfortunate end. Do you have any idea how valuable that makes you? How many families would pay a fortune for the chance to raise the last of the bloodline as their own? Horror washed over her, cold and absolute. He wasn't going to kill her. He was going to take her baby, raise it, mold it, use it as a puppet to control the empire he was stealing. No. The word came out stronger than she expected. I won't let you. You don't have a choice, little bird. His grip tightened on her arm. Now move. We're going to walk out of here together, and if anyone tries to stop us, let her go. Enzo's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. He stood at the end of the hallway, blood trickling from a cut above his eye, his gun raised and steady. Behind him, the sounds of fighting had faded, his men winning, Ren realized, taking back the house room by room. Salvatore pulled her closer, using her body as a shield. Enzo, always so dramatic. Let her go and I'll make it quick. And if I don't, you'll shoot through the mother of your child? Salvatore laughed. I know you, boy. I've known you since before you could walk. You don't have it in you. You're right. Enzo's voice was calm, almost gentle. I don't have it in me to risk her life. He lowered his gun. Ren's heart stopped. Enzo. No. But she does, Enzo continued, his eyes meeting hers with absolute trust. Don't you, little bird? Understanding crashed through her. The way Salvatore was holding her, one arm around her chest, the gun at her temple. His grip was firm but careless, the grip of a man who didn't consider her a threat. His mistake. Ren let her body go limp, sagging suddenly in his arms. Salvatore stumbled, thrown off balance, and in that fraction of a second she twisted, driving her elbow into his solar plexus, stomping down on his instep, throwing herself sideways exactly the way she'd learned in a self-defense class she'd taken years ago and never forgotten. The gun fired, the bullet went wide, and Enzo moved. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and slammed into Salvatore with the force of a freight train. They went down together, a tangle of limbs and fury, and Ren scrambled backward, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. It was over in seconds. Enzo rose from the floor, breathing hard, his knuckles bloody. Salvatore lay motionless beneath him, his eyes staring at nothing. Ren. Enzo turned to her, and his mask shattered completely. He fell to his knees in front of her, his hands running over her arms, her face, her belly, searching for damage. Are you hurt? The baby. We're fine. She grabbed his hands, stilling their frantic movement. We're fine, I promise. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair, his body shaking with sobs he'd been holding back for months. Years, maybe. A lifetime of carrying weight alone, finally crumbling under the relief of having someone to share it with. I love you, he said into her hair. I've loved you since New Year's Eve, since you looked at me like I was worth something. I thought I'd lost you. I thought he was going to take you, and I'd never. I'm here. She pulled back and cradled his face in her hands, her thumbs wiping away tears he probably didn't know he was crying. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. Promise me. I promise. She kissed him then, or he kissed her, or they met somewhere in the middle, drawn together like magnets finally allowed to touch. It was desperate and tender, and tasted like blood and tears and the beginning of something neither of them had expected to find. When they finally broke apart, the estate was quiet. The battle was over. And somewhere in the east, the first pale fingers of dawn were reaching across the sky. Your mother, Ren said suddenly. Is she safe? I had men with her all night. Enzo helped her to her feet, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist. She'll want to see you, both of you. Then take me to her. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, soft and reverent. Always, he said, from now on, always. Isabella Marchetti held on for 3 more weeks, long enough to see Salvatore's network dismantled, his allies scattered, his name erased from the family's history like a stain scrubbed from silk. Long enough to sit with Ren every afternoon in the conservatory, her thin hands resting on the swell of Ren's belly, feeling her grandchild kick against her palms. Long enough to give her blessing. You'll take care of him, she said to Ren on the last day, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes still bright with the fierce love that had defined her entire life. My son. He pretends to be stone, but he's glass underneath. He'll shatter without someone to hold him together. I'll hold him, Ren promised, tears streaming down her face. I won't let go. I know, my darling. Isabella's hand found hers and squeezed with surprising strength. That's why I can leave. Because I know he won't be alone. She died that evening, with Enzo on one side and Ren on the other, her last breath released like a bird finally allowed to fly free. The funeral was 3 days later, a sea of black suits and whispered condolences, a ceremony that felt both endless and far too short. Enzo didn't cry. Not at the church, not at the cemetery, not during the reception where distant relatives circled like vultures scenting an inheritance. He stood like a statue, accepting sympathy with mechanical grace, his hand never leaving the small of Ren's back. That night, alone in his bedroom, he shattered. Ren held him through it, the sobs that racked his body, the grief that poured out of him like a dam finally breaking. She didn't try to fix it, didn't offer platitudes or promises. She simply wrapped herself around him and let him feel everything he'd been holding back, her presence a steady anchor in the storm of his loss. I don't know how to do this without her, he said into the darkness, his voice raw. She was the only good thing about this life, the only reason any of it was worth it. That's not true. Ren pressed a kiss to his temple. She raised you to be good. That goodness lives in you, whether she's here to see it or not. You didn't know me before. The things I've done. I know you now. I know the man who searched for me for 6 months because one night meant something. I know the man who gave me a home when I had nothing, asked for nothing in return, and trusted me enough to lower his gun when my life was on the line. She pulled back to look at him, her hand finding his face in the darkness. That's who you are, Enzo. That's who she made you. And that's who our child is going to know as their father. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he kissed her. Soft, slow, full of something that felt like healing. 2 months later, their daughter was born. They named her Isabella Rose, Bella for short, a name that made Enzo's eyes go bright with unshed tears every time he said it. She had her father's whiskey-colored eyes and her mother's stubborn chin, and from the moment she drew her first breath, she had both of them wrapped entirely around her tiny fingers. Ren watched Enzo hold their daughter for the first time and felt something click into place inside her chest. This man, this dangerous, tender, complicated man, cradling a newborn like she was made of spun glass, his face soft with an awe that bordered on reverence. This was her family, her home, her future. She hadn't known she was looking for it, hadn't known she was allowed to want it. But here it was, delivered by a series of accidents and coincidences that felt, in retrospect, like fate. Marry me. The words came 3 weeks after Bella's birth, in the quiet hours of early morning when the baby was finally sleeping and the world felt suspended between one day and the next. Enzo stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching Ren watch their daughter, his expression unguarded in a way she'd learned to treasure. What? Ren turned, certain she'd misheard. Marry me. He crossed to her, dropping to one knee beside the rocking chair, pulling a box from his pocket with hands that trembled slightly. I was going to wait. Plan something elaborate. Flowers, music. A speech I'd probably forget halfway through. But I'm tired of waiting. I've spent my whole life waiting for something I didn't think I deserved. He opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the moonlight streaming through the window, a simple band of white gold crowned with a diamond that glowed like a captured star. You walked into my life by accident, Ren, a dropped photograph, a twist of fate, and you stayed. Through betrayal and violence and grief, you stayed. You gave me a daughter. You gave me hope. You gave me a reason to be better than what my family made me. Enzo dash dash, I love you. His voice cracked on the words. I love you more than I knew I was capable of loving anything. and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you were right to take a chance on me." He reached for her hand, his touch infinitely gentle. "So please, marry me. Be my wife. Let me spend forever trying to deserve you." Ren looked at him. This man who had been a stranger, then a mystery, then a protector, then something she hadn't dared to name. She thought of all the paths that had led her here, the poverty, the loneliness, the single night of weakness that had turned into the greatest gift of her life. She thought of Isabella, who had seen this coming long before either of them had. "Yes," she whispered. Then, stronger, laughing through tears she hadn't felt building. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." Enzo slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her, patient and certain, all along. Then he rose and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. In the crib beside them, Bella stirred and made a small sound of contentment, as if she approved. "She's going to be trouble," Enzo murmured against Ren's lips. "I can already tell. She's her father's daughter. God help us all." Ren laughed and pulled him closer, this man she'd found by accident and chosen on purpose. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. A new day, a new beginning, a life she'd never imagined, built from the wreckage of everything she'd thought she wanted. Some things, Ren realized, weren't accidents at all. They were detours, unexpected paths that led exactly where you needed to go. And sometimes, all it took was a single dropped photograph to change everything. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video as your support is essential for me to continue creating content like this.